Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Friday, October the 11th, 2024. So I can remember what I was doing around 24 years ago, just under 24 years ago. It was November 2000. I was in Amsterdam. I decided to go on a quick trip there and I don't think I had a great time. What did I do there? Well, I made a phone call every single evening because at the time I was doing voice horoscopes for a cell phone company in the UK, and I had to do my recordings every single day, even though I was in Amsterdam. I think the company had said they could do the recordings for me if I briefly went away, but no, I decided to do it myself. So I have to find a phone, loads of phone cards. It was of course super expensive. This was the day, this was before the time when we had super cheap telecommunications. So that's what I was doing, finding a phone box and doing my recordings. Yeah, and I also watched a lot of TV, and there was something going on at the time, and that was the American presidential elections. I remember that evening of the 2000 presidential elections, if I remember rightly, I sort of go to sleep and I sort of wake up in the night, the TV was still on. I decided to have the TV on all night for some reason, because I wanted to see what was going on in the elections. And, Democrats were winning, Republicans were winning. It seemed to be changing all evening. It's wasn't a situation where we had a result straight away, and so in fact it took a long time. We had hanging chads and everything else, and although the Democrats got the popular vote, the Republicans won that election. And thinking about the present election, it just occurred to me that there is actually a really, really interesting connection, or in fact there are several connections between the 2000 and the 2024 and the 2000 election and the 2024 election. And I think there are real similarities between Trump 2024 and George Bush 2000, which I'm going to be looking at later on in this video, with particular reference to a technique that has become popular over the last couple of decades, since 2000, since I was in Amsterdam, and that has been annual profections. And I've seen people using annual profections, I think, to suggest that Kamala Harris is going to win. But as you know, I do have my doubts. I have serious doubts. In fact, I don't think she's going to win at all. But anyway, I'll be looking at all of that later on in the video. But first of all, I want to look at the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Friday, October the 11th, 2024. Just a quick reminder, if you enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. And if you're not subscribed and you happen to enjoy this video, I'd be really, really happy if you were to become a subscriber. Anyway, let's look at what is happening today. So here is the picture for today, Friday. You can see that the moon is in late Capricorn. In fact, very late Capricorn. It's about to change sign. It's about to move into Aquarius. So if you're in the Americas, then first half of the day is going to be moon in Capricorn, last half of the day moon in Aquarius. In fact, to be precise, the moon goes into Aquarius at 5:31 p.m. London time. So 5:31 p.m. London time is going to be, what's that going to be? 12:31 p.m. just around lunchtime in London. Sort of early afternoon continental Europe. So if you're in Australia and New Zealand, and indeed most of Asia, then the moon will not go into Aquarius until tomorrow's. But it is it is a split day. And the moon moving from Capricorn to Aquarius, in one sense, it's not such a big change because the moon is moving from a sign ruled by Saturn, Capricorn, to another sign ruled by Saturn, Aquarius. So there continues to be a somewhat Saturnine feel to it. When the moon in Capricorn, moon in Aquarius, what do they have in common? I mean, they're not the most emotional placement for the moon, but there are some differences. The moon in Capricorn tends to be more focused on the material world and stability, whereas moon in Aquarius can be more about sort of ideas and independence. And we are going to sort of start to really sort of value independence. Now, as the moon moves through late Capricorn, it does make a few aspects. I suppose the most important of those aspects, well, you've got trine to Uranus. So moon late Capricorn makes a trine to Uranus in late Taurus. That sort of stirs things up a little, especially as it's making a conjunction to Pluto at the same time. In fact, it's making a sextile to Neptune. So in late Capricorn, the moon aspects all of the outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. So there may be a sense in which we feel that we are in touch with something that we don't fully understand, and we might respond quite quickly to it, particularly with that moon trine Uranus. Though, having said that, moon conjunct Pluto can be quite introspective. We can be aware of powerful things going on which we perhaps aren't quite able to verbalize. And then, moon moves into Aquarius. Now, from a fixed star perspective, there's actually a lot going on. I mean, I'm not a big fixed star expert. You can tell every time I talk about a fixed star, I have to look at a book. It's not totally my thing. I know there are astrologers who do entire readings based on the fixed stars. They would put a heavy emphasis on the fixed stars. But that's not my approach. But still, I think when we see fixed stars coming up, we do have to mention them. Of course, Uranus is getting really close to Algol. It's only 6 arc minutes from Algol, so Uranus is moving backwards towards Algol. That does have a potential for evil and for bad things happening. And so that means that whenever we see a planet aspecting Uranus, particularly if it's a hard aspect, conjunction, square, opposition, semi-square, sesquiquadrate, we perhaps need to be concerned because it can suggest that bad things might happen. Then we've got Jupiter, is stationary retrograde at the moment, and it's conjunct Bellatrix. The female warrior can be about being very ambitious, can be keen for honour and preferment, but it can also be quite aggressive, and we want to get our way with Jupiter conjunct Bellatrix. But then we have Mars conjunct Castor. So there's Mars at 20 degrees Cancer, and it's conjunct a fixed star called Castor, and this is Castor. In fact, it's Alpha Geminorum. That would suggest that it's the brightest star in the northern twins, and so it's quite a fairly aggressive fixed star. But it says here that there's a fondness for horses. So if you have any connection with horses, or you're into horse riding, or you keep horses, or you want to keep a horse, then that may be something to consider. Though I suppose with Mars conjunct Castor, one I suppose has to be a bit careful. I read somewhere I was reading about Australia, and what animals cause the most deaths in Australia. And of course, from a European perspective, we always think about snakes and spiders and whatever, but because we've never been to Australia, we don't know what it's like to be in Australia. But I read somewhere that the three animals that cause the most deaths in Australia are sharks, bees, and horses. And those are the three things you have to watch out for, particularly bees and horses. That's sounds kind of mundane, but yeah. Horses are one of the most dangerous animals in Australia. It's not tiger snakes or inland taipans. But so horses, if you have an association of horses, I think you're going to perhaps want to get close to horses, be with horses, and I think that's good. But obviously be careful because it's Mars conjunct Castor. And it does also talk about loss of fortune, disgrace, sickness and trouble with Mars. It says Mars conjunct Castor, evil disposition, much travel, aimless life, many ups and downs. So there is a certain perhaps potential with Mars conjunct Castor for seeing things in the worst possible light, being a bit negative. Perhaps the unpleasant side of our personality will come to the surface and we might be overly aggressive. Or it might be about other people who, they're behaving in a particular way. Now, it's not just Mars that is on a fixed star. It is, well, we've just talked about Uranus conjunct Algol. We've got Jupiter conjunct Bellatrix, Mars conjunct Castor. Then we've got Venus. And Venus is on a rather unpronounceable fixed star called Unukalai. One of those, a U. So, yeah, so Unukalai. So Unukalai is it's according to Robson, a pale yellow star situated on the neck of the serpent, from Unk al Hayai, the neck of the snake, sometimes called Cor Serpentis, the serpent's heart, and it gives immorality, accidents, violence, and dangers of poison. And if you look to see what Robson says about Venus conjunct Unukalai, he says enmity, a jealousy of own sex, bad for domestic matters, favourable for gain, secret death, probably by poison. Probably by poison, that sounds rather definite. So with Venus conjunct Unukalai, there is potentially a certain amount of unpleasantness around. Venus is already in Scorpio, and there is jealousy. It says jealousy of one's own sex. So I don't know. That's something one has to be concerned about. I've heard that Jill Biden can't stand Kamala Harris. By the way, I mean that makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, I think even Joe Biden can't stand Kamala Harris, but I don't think, as far as Jill Biden's concerned, that Kamala Harris is her favourite person. But anyway, Jill Biden perhaps has to try to be more relaxed with Venus conjunct Unukalai. One has to be careful about vindictiveness here. And poison. I suppose we mustn't poison ourselves. I mean, that makes sense. Be careful what one drinks. I remember a long time ago someone telling me that they went to a party and they were fairly drunk and they were looking for a bottle of wine and they drank a bottle of bleach and apparently nothing bad happened. I mean, that was just pure luck, I assume. I suppose with bleach, if it gets to the stomach without going into the lungs, that's a problem. If it goes all the way down and it goes into the stomach, it's not so bad. But I suppose if it gets into the lungs, that can cause all sorts of problems. Anyway, that's the broad picture about today. A lot of fixed star activity. And so I suppose with fixed star activity, there's a general feeling that kind of things can happen that aren't necessarily related to our chart, aren't necessarily related to ourselves, but it's just perhaps it's an atmosphere of, there's a certain amount of evil in the air, maybe, but maybe I'm being melodramatic and I don't want to make you paranoid. So that chart is done from a perspective of New York. So what I want to do is look at a chart from a perspective of Sydney, Australia, because those two locations are so far apart. So the key thing is the moon. The moon is at 29 Capricorn at noon in New York. If you go to Sydney, Australia, and this is representative of Australia and New Zealand and East Asia and Kamchatka, and if you look at it from the perspective of Sydney, then the moon is at 21 Capricorn. This emphasizes the point that in Sydney, Australia, the moon is a long way from moving into Aquarius. It's hardly in late Capricorn at 21 Capricorn. I suppose, if you look at the main configuration, if you are in Australia and New Zealand, the moon is square the sun. You've got a sort of first quarter moon. Moon is actually a square Chiron, so you've got moon square sun square Chiron, and I suppose if you're in this part of the world, then you are perhaps challenged. You are challenged to do something which makes you out, shows you to be different. You are perhaps challenged to do things differently. And that would be perhaps moon square Chiron. And also moon, the first quarter moon, the idea that this is when you start to see how the lunar cycle is really unfolding, and you realize perhaps that something has to be done, and it perhaps relates to how you can be different, and in being different you can go some way perhaps towards healing a wound. Maybe it's your wound, maybe it's another person's wound. So that might be a big theme, or a theme, if you are in Australia or New Zealand. But if you're in somewhere else in the world, I suppose the moon is still in Capricorn for at least some of the day, wherever you are, and so you still might pick up on some of that to some extent. Now, turning to the heliocentric picture, so looking at things from the perspective of the sun, here it is. So from a perspective of the sun, Mars and Jupiter, as always, getting closer and closer. Now only 2 degrees apart, and with Mars and Jupiter so close, we might be thinking that something has to happen. We do need to in some way assert ourselves, and that might feel very important. That it seems to be coming up, something that we really do have to do. Mercury and Venus are now in sextile. That sextile is starting to separate, and with that sextile, Mercury sextile Venus, it's a fairly nice sextile. It allows us to be ourselves. It allows us to communicate who we are and what we want, but in a gentle way. And I think we can also show off what we can do with that Venus sextile Mercury. So that's pretty much it. That is it, actually, with the heliocentric picture. So I would have said heliocentrically, there's not much to report, though just bear in mind that Mars conjunct Jupiter is getting closer and closer. So now what I want to do is look at the astrology for the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Friday, October the 11th, 2024. Aries. Aries, you feel that there is something you want to do, and you just have to do it, and it may actually be a little bit compulsive, and that may be connected with the fact that Mars, your ruler, is on the fixed star Castor, and I've just been discussing Castor, and Castor is, I suppose, quite a high energy fixed star, but I suppose it can also get itself into trouble. You might want to do things too quickly, and some of that Aries selfishness, might start to make itself felt. You might find it difficult to always think of other people, and you might be sort of thinking about yourself, what's important to you, what's important to your security, and so that might encourage you to do something, impulsive, which just doesn't help. It perhaps confuses people or upsets people. So that's perhaps something that you need to be a bit careful about. And I suppose we were talking about the connection between Castor and horses. So I suppose if you have the opportunity, it might be a good idea to go horse riding or doing something to do with horses, if appropriate, if you have the opportunity. But be careful. As I was saying, Mars conjunct Castor, it can be accident prone, and horses is, people can have terrible accidents on horses. So be a little careful around horses. But I understand that there may be a certain attraction to things like horse riding and equestrian events. Maybe you can just watch horse racing on TV. Maybe that's or show jumping or something like that. It might be somehow remedial, or just may help you to relax. Now, aside from that, the moon is moving through sort of late Capricorn, getting ready to move into Aquarius, and there is a conjunction between the moon and Pluto today. And I think, Aries, with that moon-Pluto conjunction, you're going to feel that, it may even be now or never. At least it might feel as if it's now or never. There may be just something that you're really concerned about, and you feel that you actually have to do something. And if you don't do something, then you might miss your chance. Or you might be concerned about who your rivals are. If you don't take advantage of something, then then someone else might. And perhaps you're just picking up on the kind of day it is. As I was saying in the introduction, there are a lot of planets hitting fixed stars. We've got Jupiter conjunct Bellatrix, we've got Venus on Unukalai, and of course Mars on Castor, Uranus conjunct Algol. It just adds to the environment of suspicion and jealousy, and that's kind of what we're living in. And you are part of this, and you may just feel that you just have to do something. And there is going to be, overall, Aries, a sense of tension today. You feel that just something has to happen, and you want it to happen now, and at the same time you're very aware of everything that is holding you back, and you wonder, can you do anything about it? Can you assert yourself? Perhaps you might feel that if you are going to assert yourself, you can only do it successfully if you use maximum force. Hence this feeling of tension, and I think that tension could be very real. Now, as far as relationships are concerned, I think other people do have to be treated with a certain amount of respect, but it's probably a bad day for trusting people. But especially if you don't know someone well. And I mean, it doesn't help the fact that Venus is conjunct this fixed star Unukalai. I mean, that is the heart of the serpent. You never know what's going on in people's hearts. You can't know for sure. And especially if you don't know someone well, if you've been with someone all your life, then that's different. But if you just met someone, you're just getting used to someone, or someone presents themselves to you, there's no reason to trust them, because it's going to be very difficult to know what is happening in their heart. Really, really difficult. And Aries does actually have a trusting streak to it, because Aries is quite a spontaneous sign, and let's just do it. Let's not think about it too much. And so, possibly Aries, it's a bad time to trust people unless you really know what you're doing, and you shouldn't be taking too much risk. Don't assume that other people are as simple and straightforward as you are. Taurus. Venus is on this fixed star Unukalai, and with Venus on this fixed star, and this fixed star is the heart of the serpent, do carefully examine your motivations and your feelings, because Venus is not just conjunct this fixed star; it's in Scorpio, and so that Venus in Scorpio energy, remembering that Unukalai is the heart of the snake, is going to be stronger than usual. You are going to be more intense than usual. You are, I think, in many cases, going to have feelings which aren't always pleasant. I mean, that's just the way it goes. I mean, we can't all be pleasant. In fact, all of us have an unpleasant streak to us. And I would have said that your own unpleasant streak is there. It's not to say that you are being unpleasant, but I think you could be unpleasant. And there is sort of a heightened risk of jealousy. And, we all feel jealous of people at times, but you perhaps have to sort of carefully look at your motivations. What is motivating you? When you think about other people, why do you feel a particular way about them? And it just may be that some feelings are coming up which you're not entirely comfortable with. And I don't think there's any need to be particularly concerned about it. I think it's just very important to be aware of our darker feelings. They go back, don't they? I mean, they go back right to the beginning. And, all of us are capable of jealousy and having horrible thoughts. And, I suppose it's a reminder of, what's her name? What is it? Melanie Klein. Melanie Klein talked about this. She talked, this psychotherapist, she was, or psychoanalyst, she was talking about the incredibly powerful feelings that not just children have, but babies have. We're almost born with a complete set of adult feelings, and how we feel when we're really young. I mean, even the first few months of life can have an impact on what we feel now. Some of those feelings can be awful. Some of those feelings can be sort of murderous. And so perhaps, Taurus, we have to have a respect for our own feelings and not be particularly afraid of them. In fact, the more we are aware of our feelings, the more we are comfortable with our feelings, even if they are quite negative, the less afraid we need to be of them. And from a sort of more mundane level, the moon is changing sign from Capricorn to Aquarius. And with this sign change, I think that there may be a new focus, a focus perhaps on what you'd like to do. And we've got this moon conjunct Pluto. The moon makes this conjunction to Pluto, and then it moves into Aquarius. Now that would take place sort of early afternoon in the Americas, or even late morning perhaps if you're in California, or late afternoon, early evening if you're in Europe. Tomorrow if you're in Australia or New Zealand. But with the moon making a conjunction to Pluto and then moving into Aquarius, it does indicate, Taurus, that there's a new sense of ambition you perhaps want to rededicate yourself to a particular purpose. And a purpose, I'm talking about a fairly mundane purpose, something that you want to do, something that you feel is very important. And if you can do that, I think, in fact, that might be quite a useful thing to do, because, Taurus, I do think there are a lot of powerful feelings flying around at the moment, and perhaps they need to be focused. And so if you do have negative feelings, if you do have feelings of resentment, rather than sit on these feelings, concentrate them on particular goals, particular things you want. So you can sort of shift the energy, and you can perhaps take what may be a negative and you can perhaps turn it into something very positive. Gemini. Gemini, you have a particular opinion of yourself. I think you are considering how you appear, how you come across. I think that is of concern to you, and you're perhaps wondering, what people think of you, and not just sort of on an intellectual level, what you look like, what kind of first appearances are you creating. And I suppose that means that if you are, going somewhere for the first time, or perhaps meeting someone for the first time, you perhaps want to carefully consider what kind of image you want to create. I think that might be important, and there's no need to be self-conscious about it, but I do think that the way you handle your image could actually be quite important. Now, one thing going on today is that we have the moon changing sign. The moon changing sign from Capricorn to Aquarius, particularly important, I think, if you're in the Americas, because really the last half of the day, so from lunchtime, late morning onwards, we've got the moon moving through Aquarius. Okay, it doesn't happen until sort of later in the day if you're in Europe. That's more a feature of late afternoon, early evening. But whenever that sign change happens, even if the sign change happens tomorrow, if you're in Australia or New Zealand, when that sign change happens, I think that in some respects it's going to be quite liberating, because the moon has been in Capricorn, which is a difficult place for the moon to be in, especially if you're in a Gemini. If you're a Gemini, you can't quite be yourself, and then with moon moving into Aquarius, it just feels more comfortable. The moon is in Aquarius. Aquarius is an air sign. You become aware of new possibilities. You can see what's available, and at the same time, the world becomes just a bit less boring, and you might see the possibility of adventures, or finding out about something that you perhaps know absolutely nothing, but you know absolutely nothing about. Though as the moon moves from from Capricorn to Aquarius, as that changeover happens, there may be a moment of uncertainty. There may be a moment of perhaps self-consciousness, where you're very aware of who you are, but you're also very aware of how you might be perceived. As I said right at the beginning of this piece on Gemini, and there might just be a feeling that actually you can't do anything, that you are stuck, and that you're trying to hold on to something. Now, this feeling is going to be quite brief, so I wouldn't worry about it too much. But so if over the course of the day you find yourself suddenly feeling that there's nothing you can do, that everything is too difficult, everything is too intense, if you find yourself feeling that, don't worry about it too much. Just let the whole thing move on. Just let the thing develop, and eventually moon will move into move out of Capricorn into Aquarius. It's like kind of worrying that if you hold your breath too long, you'll die. I suppose if you hold, you can't hold your breath for too long, provided you're not being forced to hold your breath. But in the end, you have to breathe, and it's the same thing. If you feel things are a bit suffocating, then just don't panic. In the end, sort of an automatic reflex will kick in, and suddenly there'll be this great sense of, I suppose, a sense that things are finally moving, finally are working, and things are just all of a sudden just going to become a lot less complicated. So at some stage there is a transition, and once you're over that transition, just things are going to become, I think, a lot easier as the moon moves into Aquarius. And tomorrow, or when I do my forecast for the weekend, I'll be looking in further detail about what it means for the moon to be in Aquarius for Geminis. Cancer, it is a day when there is a bit of a changeover. It's probably a day of two parts, unless you're in Australia or New Zealand. And if you're in Australia and New Zealand, the moon is in Capricorn all day, and certainly that's the case. Well, that's really the case for a lot of Asia as well. But if you're in the Americas, it's a split day with the moon moving from Capricorn to Aquarius. If you're in Europe, the moon moves into Aquarius at the end of the day. And that sign change for you, Cancer, is of some significance. I think that, over the last couple of days, Cancer, you've perhaps been aware of your responsibilities. You haven't maybe felt great about these responsibilities, but you do understand that the world around you, the people around you, they can't be ignored, and in some respects they have to be humoured. You could try to be independent, you could try to do things your own way, but still it might not work out, or it might not have worked out. And you always did have to consider other people and their needs. Yeah, I think that was annoying. And the moon as it moves through late Capricorn, it does make a few important aspects. It makes a sextile to Neptune, it makes a trine to Uranus, and it makes a conjunction to Pluto. And perhaps it's that conjunction to Pluto that we should really be focusing on. I mean, conjunctions tend to be more important than sextiles and trines. And with that conjunction, there may be a moment where you just feel that things are a bit heavy, and you may regard other people as being just a bit heavy. I mean, not literally, I mean, but heavy in a sort of an emotional sense. Or you may feel, Cancer, that there are just things you don't really want to talk about, and you don't want to reveal, and there may be pressure to reveal something, but you look at who you're dealing with, and you're just wondering, is it really worth the effort, or even, indeed, is it worth the risk? Remembering that Venus, which is a universal planet of relationships of other people, is conjunct this fixed star Una Cali, if I pronounce that correctly. And so with Venus conjunct Una Cali, you kind of just feel that just certain people can't be trusted. You as a Cancerian, you know what's in their heart. You know what is in the heart of the serpent. You can really feel it. And okay, you might be imagining it. There's always that possibility, and Cancer is certainly an imaginative sign. But if you get a bad feeling about someone, then probably you should trust your feelings. And then the moon does move into Aquarius, and I think that when the moon moves into Aquarius, Cancer, in some respects the pressure is off. You can be more independent minded. You can you can take things seriously in your own way, and you're going to have a greater freedom to concentrate on the things that matter to you. And yeah, other people are still going to be there, but I just don't think they're going to be so immediately there. They're not going to be in your face so much. And I think that you can carve out your separate little world, and the pressures of other people and having to worry about what their motives are, I don't think that's going to be so much of an issue. So ideally, Cancer, you'll end the day on a fairly independent and self-contained note. Leo, you still seem to be somewhat reserved. You know, I've been talking about this for the last couple of days, that Leos have perhaps not quite been their normal self. You've perhaps taken the view that you can't really engage with other people, and you just might actually be questioning your own social skills. You might just feel that you're not in the mood, and that if you were to try to engage with other people, it wouldn't work out very well. I mean, it's not necessarily the fact that you are socially awkward, but it's just you're not in the mood, and you have your doubts and you have your reservations. And I think today, when you look at what's going on around you, you may actually start to see evidence that your caution was actually quite justified, and that when you look at what people are doing, what people are planning, you realize that it is difficult, and it's really not something that you particularly want to get involved with. And instead, it would be better if you were to make sure that your part of the world is secure, is well organized, everything's in place, and just look after yourself, and that should be enough. Yet the moon is moving out of Capricorn into Aquarius, and you know, this sign change kind of depends on your time zone. Could be late morning if you're in California, or sort of mid-morning, I don't know. California, that would be around 9:31. Well, that's kind of mid-morning. I suppose it depends on how you see mornings, 9:31 a.m. But it could be tomorrow if you're in Australia or New Zealand or Kamchatka. So it does depend, but still, there is this sense that the moon is moving from Capricorn to Aquarius, and you're having perhaps to consider other people with the moon moving into Aquarius. You don't really want to consider them, particularly as you have your doubts and your suspicions, but still you have to. But that doesn't mean you have to do anything. When I say you have to, I'd perhaps say instead you might be advised to, because you know, at some stage, I mean, not today, but over the weekend, there is a grand trine coming up in air signs. You know, you're going to have Moon in Aquarius. It's going to be trine the Sun. It's going to be trine Jupiter. It's quite a nice grand trine. You might not feel it at the moment. In fact, I'm sure you're not feeling it at the moment. But things are going to be moving in a social sense, perhaps in a relationship sense, in a couple of days' time. So perhaps you should start to prepare yourself for it, and perhaps you need to make some decisions, early decisions, about where the best place to be is. Who do you need to talk to? And indeed, what are your plans for the weekend? I mean, you've got a lot of reasons to be careful in terms of how you plan the weekend, but at the same time, there are things that you do need to be aware of. So don't be totally suspicious today. A little bit of suspicion is certainly a good thing, and certainly self-reliance is a good thing, but things are changing. The moon is going to move into Aquarius, and when the moon does move into Aquarius, whether it happens today or tomorrow, I do think, Leo, that you're just going to feel a whole lot better. Virgo, at the moment you are quite concerned with what you can do. I mean, that does matter to you. You know, what can you do which is special to you? And there may be a little bit of obsession about it, and I'd probably suggest that might actually be healthy obsession. You know, if something is important, it's okay to be obsessed about it and to hold on to it. You know, hold on to what you're good at, and it doesn't matter what's happening elsewhere. Hold on tight, and don't be afraid to do a bit of boasting. You know, boasting is obviously not generally seen in a good light, but sometimes you have to boast. You have to slightly exaggerate what you can do, what your capacities are, simply to get attention. And people need to know about you. It's very important that they know about you. And it's not a time to be hiding things. And so that might be something that you need to do. You're almost investing for the future, because you're letting people know about you, and you might not see any immediate feedback, any immediate response, but you're getting the information out. And I do think that could be tremendously useful. And so really do try to be open and honest, and don't worry if you're exaggerating, or I suppose that you don't want to completely exaggerate, but a little bit of exaggeration I think could be extremely useful. Now, the moon is changing sign today or tomorrow. It's the moon has been moving through Capricorn, and Capricorn is an earth sign. It's got a sympathy with your sign, Virgo, and it is moving from Capricorn to Aquarius. And hopefully what that means is that you can get a sense of what you can do and what makes you special, and that hopefully happens when moon is in Capricorn. And then when it moves into Aquarius, you can start thinking about what you need to do to make the whole thing stick. It's great to have things you can do well, but are you going to be able to do them well on a consistent level? And are you going to be sufficiently well practiced? And indeed, are you going to have a system by which you can always use your best skills, where they're always available to you? And perhaps you have to create a system. And so as the day progresses, you might want to do some organization, some reflection, and making sure that everything is grounded in reality. You have to sort of perhaps take something you're good at, which sometimes can be quite passing. You have an opportunity to utilize a skill, then the opportunity goes away, and then you forget about it. But really, it should be part of your life just all the time. And that's the way it should be. So it might feel itself to be something you don't entirely want to do, and you may also be concerned about how your resources get allocated. So, you've got fixed resources. We've all got fixed resources. I suppose there are emotional resources and there are material resources, and there are resources simply about time. And I suppose we can't give our time and our energy and our money to everything. And so we have to make choices. And making those choices may be a little bit difficult at the moment. You may be wondering where to make your priority, where to prioritize. And in terms of making your priorities, I do think that you need to think about what makes you special. So prioritize the things that make you unique, and if you feel that you can do something, you're doing something that what kind of everyone else can do it, it's not special and it's not unique, then don't prioritize it so much. So focus on what makes you unique and make some decisions there. That might actually be something that you have to do as the moon moves from Capricorn to Aquarius. I'm not saying that it's necessarily a particularly exciting day. I mean, I think that you are able to make an impact. I think that you are, if you make the effort, you're able to get people to notice you. And you're able to create an impression. And perhaps that's why I was talking about a little bit of boasting. Not too much boasting, of course, but just by talking up what makes you special in an ever so slightly exaggerated way. Or maybe it's not exaggeration, it's just enthusiasm. If you can conjure up some enthusiasm, then I think your enthusiasm will stick, and that could put you in good stead at a later stage. Libra, don't doubt yourself. You are in a position where you really can make things happen. If you need to make things happen, somehow you can bring to bear the full force of the universe in terms of getting what you want. And you can do it in a way that is just spontaneous and enthusiastic, and it could come from nowhere. It can catch people by surprise. It can perhaps catch you by surprise. So as you go through the day, you shouldn't feel any sense of powerlessness. I mean, I don't think you're actually in the mood really for creating big effects, but if you need to, it's always there. So don't ever feel today any great sense of powerlessness or a feeling that you're stuck, because in a way there's always an escape. You can always change things. That is something that is available all the time for you. So I think that is something you need to bear in mind. And it's important that you don't allow yourself to drift into negative thinking, particularly as you've got this strength. And this negative thinking should not be underestimated, because we do have Venus, which is Venus's ruler of Libra, is conjunct this fixed star Unukalai. And so with Venus conjunct Unukalai, remembering that Unukalai is the heart of the serpent. It's very scorpionic, I would have said. Venus is in Scorpio, it's conjunct this fixed star. And with this conjunction, I think there is some danger that your feelings get a little bit out of hand, and you might start thinking things that you're not particularly proud of, and you may be sort of asking yourself, how are you thinking about that? Why are you thinking about that? That's not very nice. But it's okay to have thoughts and feelings which are not pleasant. It's just if they get out of hand, it can be a problem. And if you do have negative feelings about other people, then maybe what is encouraging this negativity is perhaps you're just not being open and honest enough. It's important to shine light. If you shine light on things, then very often they lose their unpleasantness. And it goes back to what I was saying about you having a capacity to take action. If you feel powerless, and you feel perhaps resentful about other people and the way you're being treated, then that powerlessness is, to an extent, something that you are imposing upon yourself. So give yourself a sense of power, and I think you will then have a more positive view about other people and the world in which you live and your environment. And certainly there's no need to regard yourself as being a victim. Sorry to use that word, but you do have a great sense of control, Libra. So don't doubt yourself on that score. And matters are going to be improved by the fact that the moon is moving from Capricorn to Aquarius, and this movement, I think, is fortunate, because the moon in Capricorn, while the moon has been in Capricorn, the moon is conjunct Pluto in Capricorn, and this moon conjunct Pluto in Capricorn could just make you quite insular. It might give you a sense of sort of negativity, and I think it gives a similar message, perhaps, that moon conjunct Pluto, as Venus conjunct this fixed star Unicali, and going down into yourself, going too deeply into your past and your emotions, and getting caught by it all. And then the moon does change sign. It moves from Capricorn into Aquarius, and I think when the moon moves into Aquarius, you're going to feel a whole lot better. When the moon moves into Aquarius, to begin with, it doesn't actually make any aspects. It's free, and so with that sign change, you'll perhaps realize that all these obstacles that you'd imagined existed, and all the complexities you imagined existed, when you're actually honest with yourself and you see what's in front of you, you'll almost see that it's a blank canvas. You can do what you like, you can paint what you like, you can create what you like. And so that changeover is, I think, going to be for you really quite invigorating. And certainly, Libra, if there's something you want to do, something that's important to you, then you have a chance to do it. There's really no excuse not to do it, okay, unless it's something completely absurd or other people get hurt or whatever. But if it's just something you want to do that's spontaneous, that's very much a part of who you are, then Libra, I think over the course of the day, or might be into tomorrow, depends where you are. So perhaps if you're in Australia or New Zealand, but one way or another, Libra, you are certainly going to be able to do it. And I suppose ideally you should try to be as independent as possible. I think independence does matter, because if you get too close to other people, if you try to involve other people in what you're doing, you might find that they are kind of in your way. I mean, that is possible. And this is because there is a square aspect coming up between the Sun and Mars. And this Sun, because we've got Sun in Libra and we've got Mars in Cancer. Now that square aspect is not exact until the weekend, but it's perhaps something you do need to consider a bit, and that shows how difficult other people can be. On the other hand, if you're dealing with people who you absolutely you're absolutely familiar with. You know them well, and you're absolutely sure that your priorities and their priorities are the same. Then, under those circumstances, there may be scope for really dynamic cooperation, but it does have to be with the right people, people you really know and understand. If you're talking about strangers, people you don't know well, certainly people you don't trust, then I don't think that cooperation is an option. Scorpio. Scorpio, Mars is your ruler, and Mars is conjunct the fixed star Castor. And Castor is a fixed star which is quite dynamic, and it's perhaps about you wanting things, wanting to be recognized, wanting to make as much progress as quickly as possible. And that might be one aspect of Mars conjunct Castor. And I do think that you can achieve quite a lot, and you can certainly get noticed. But there is a danger that you take things too far. There's a certain amount of tension at the moment, and Scorpio, yeah, I think you are feeling tense. You're feeling a bit nervous, and you feel that you want things to happen, and you want things to happen as quickly as possible, and you're going to be impatient, and indeed at times you may be a little bit selfish. And I think the selfishness will come about because you just feel that it has to happen now, and you can't have other people holding you up. And so it may be, Scorpio, it's Friday, it's the end of a week, things have to be wrapped up. It may be that your feelings of hastiness are absolutely justified, and that today has to be the day, and you just have to give it everything you've got. And if you're selfish in the process, too bad. But with Mars conjunct Castor, it can take things a little bit too far. And if you push yourself and you push other people too far, then there is some danger that you trip up. So, Scorpio, I do think that it's very important that you have a sense of proportion. And, you should also bear in mind that the moon is changing sign, and it's moving from Capricorn into Aquarius. And that sign change, whenever it happens, it could be in the morning if you're in California, it could be tomorrow if you're in Australia or New Zealand. Whenever it happens, it will to some extent slow you down. Although we mustn't forget that Mars is conjunct Castor, there's still going to be a sense of urgency there, I think. But perhaps once the moon moves from Capricorn into Aquarius, that will give you a greater sense of perspective. You'll still feel that something has to be done, but you'll also become perhaps more aware of your own grounding and the fact that you don't want to upset everything, and you don't want to upset other people. You don't want to upset yourself, and so perhaps that is going to be helpful when the moon moves into Aquarius. And I think that when the moon moves into Aquarius, there's probably going to be less pressure, because the moon, just before it moves into Aquarius, makes a conjunction to Pluto. And that conjunction to Pluto could just make you more intense than usual. It may make it hard for you to tell people what you really want. And sometimes when you're in a real hurry, when you feel there's a sense of urgency, you forget to explain yourself. And if you're in a hurry and you don't explain yourself, then what happens is you get resistance because people don't know what you're doing. They don't know why you're in such a hurry. But if you take the time to talk about what's bothering you, to explain why there is a sense of urgency, then people are more likely to get out of your way, or perhaps even to offer some cooperation. So talking to people might seem a waste of time, but overall it might actually be more efficient and might actually allow you to accomplish your goals faster than if you had just decided that other people just can't be talked to. So try to be a little bit relaxed, and explanation does matter today. You don't have to explain everything, but you have to explain enough so that people are in a position to evaluate you and give you the cooperation, or at least leeway, that you feel that you need. Sagittarius. Sagittarius, you are quite attractive today. People take notice of you. It's very clear who you are. It's very clear that you're someone who is you're quite easygoing, at least on the surface, and you're someone who people want to know. And so, because of this attractiveness and your likability today, I think that you should take advantage of it, because it's going to help you in terms of, well, at least feeling happy. I mean, happiness is important, but it can also help you in terms of getting your way, making progress. And I think that in terms of your social life, for example, the day might have a slow start, but I think that sort of in the end things will start to move. And in terms of relationships, I think it can actually be a day when you can make links, you can make contacts, and if you're trying to impress anyone, then now's the time to do it. And yeah, it shouldn't be much of a problem, though particularly late in the day when the moon moves into Aquarius. Now, I understand that if you're in Australia and New Zealand, then the moon doesn't really move into Aquarius until tomorrow. But yeah, tomorrow will happen eventually. And so with the moon moving out of Capricorn into Aquarius, this is just going to allow you to really be yourself, and to tell people what's on your mind, and also to be able to understand what other people are looking for, and you can sort of give it back to them. And in this sense, you may be quite perceptive. You'll be able to get a sense of what someone else wants to hear, what kind of behaviors they want to see. And so if you're trying to ingratiate yourself with anyone, then I do think that you can be very successful. Though that's at least one aspect of the day, and that's more about sort of later in the day. Though there is a conjunction between the moon and Pluto, and this conjunction between the moon and Pluto, okay, maybe more of a feature if you're in Australia or New Zealand, more of a feature this morning. So if you're in the Americas, this Moon-Pluto conjunction is about the morning, the afternoon if you're in Europe, wherever you are. But so this Moon-Pluto conjunction does suggest a moment of feeling that you need to hold on to something, that there's something you need to fight for. And it may be something very material, because this Moon-Pluto conjunction is in Capricorn, just before the moon moves into Aquarius. And so it could be about money, it could be a particular item that you're very possessive about. It's something you want, and you feel you want to keep hold of it, and you won't let it go. And so perhaps you might feel that you have to fight to get something that's owed to you, or if someone, so I don't know, someone might have borrowed something and you want it back. I mean, that's another possibility. So, material possessions at some stage could be important to you. Now, you might say, oh, well, it's just a passing phase and you'll just wait for Moon in Aquarius and you'll just let it go. But still, I mean, if something belongs to you, it belongs to you. And if you feel you have an opportunity to get it back, then you should act accordingly. You shouldn't just do nothing, tell yourself that it's just money, so what? No, if you need to stand up for yourself when it comes to material things today. And I think that if you are able to stand up to yourself, then I think the results overall will probably go in your favor. Capricorn. So Capricorn, we do have some activity in your sign, because we've got the Moon moving through late Capricorn, and as it moves through late Capricorn, the Moon makes a number of aspects. It makes a trine to Uranus, it makes a sextile to Neptune, and it makes a conjunction to Pluto. And that conjunction to Pluto really is quite powerful, and it gives you a powerful sense of what you need to do, and you do not want to be sidetracked. So Capricorn, if today you decide that something has to be done, then I would suggest you go and do it, provided it's not going to get you into trouble or it's not going to cause anyone else a lot of harm. I would suggest you do it. And this conjunction between the Moon and Pluto feeds into Mercury as well, because the Moon makes a square to Mercury, and then the Moon makes a conjunction to Pluto. So you are going to be able to strongly advocate for yourself, and you are not going to be in the mood for compromise. And once you've got your head around something, once you've made a decision, Capricorn, then you're going to be 100% focused on it. And I don't think you will allow yourself to be distracted. I mean, I know that the Moon does move into Aquarius today, and you could say that when the Moon moves into Aquarius, Pluto will be in Capricorn and Moon will be in Aquarius, so that conjunction is no longer operational. But really, even if the Moon is in Aquarius, the Moon is still conjunct Pluto. And I think that Moon conjunct Pluto could be dominating today. And so Capricorn, I think it's okay to be obsessed. If you're obsessed about something useful and something that you really need, then I do think that you can really get your way, and you're going to be, I think, very persuasive. Your use of words today is going to be really powerful, and people will listen to you. I mean, they can't help but listen to you. I suppose it's because you're not going to just say things for the sake of it. You're not going to talk nonsense. You're not going to get tied up in small talk and whatever. You're only going to say something if it matters. And when you say something that matters, there will be a power and intensity to your words which just can't be ignored. And so if you want things to happen your way, it can happen. It will happen. So it's just very important that you absolutely do not doubt yourself, and you decide what matters, and then you just give it everything you've got. Now, the Moon does move into Aquarius. I think with the Moon moving into Aquarius, it possibly makes things a little less intense when the moon moves into Aquarius. But as I said, the moon is still making a conjunction to Pluto. But when the moon moves into Aquarius, I suppose it's out of your sign, and you may feel a greater sense of freedom, and that there are less things in your way. And I suppose if you have really pushed it today, particularly at the beginning of the day, and you really pushed it, then you may be able to have cleared so many obstacles from your path that you actually have free time, that you can actually start to see the future, and an unobstructed future, and you can actually start to see what is actually possible in the world out there. So there may be just a moment of intense activity and intense focus, and you get your way, and then you can relax and start moving into the weekend. Aquarius, the moon is about to go into your sign, but it doesn't get there immediately. It may be sort of late morning that it moves into your sign if you're in California. It may not be until tomorrow if you're in Australia or New Zealand that the moon goes into your sign. But it'll get there in the end. And so a bit of patience may be required. It's almost like you're getting ready for something, but you're not quite ready to go all the way. So don't be in too much of a hurry, and also try to consider what is happening, because there are things happening out there. You know, the moon is making a conjunction to Pluto in Capricorn. It's making a trine to Uranus. Moon is in Capricorn, making a trine to Uranus in Taurus, and also the moon is making a sextile to Neptune. So these are quite sort of high-level aspects which may be difficult to be fully aware of, sort of on a conscious level, particularly if one is too busy. And perhaps what you should be doing, Aquarius, is you should be making some effort to sort of slow things down so that you can start to understand what is happening. What does it mean for the moon to be conjunct Pluto in Capricorn? And with that moon conjunct Pluto, it may be that you get some kind of realization on an inner level, and that things are changing, that you are changing, and you're reminded that very soon Pluto is going to move into Aquarius. It sort of was in your sign. Now it's moved back, and it's not so immediately present for you, but it's still there. It's still waiting, and in a month or two's time, Pluto will move back into Aquarius. Just a reminder: when does Pluto move into Aquarius? Pluto moves into Aquarius 19th of November. So you haven't got long to wait. Just over a month, Pluto will be back in your sign. And with today's conjunction between Moon and Pluto, you're perhaps reminded of all the things you want to do, all the things you want to change. And now might not be the time when you can actually do much, but sooner or later, things will happen. And I think that you'll kind of be able to get your power back. And so, yeah, reflection, I think, could be a very important part of what is happening today. What's happening today, and on a more mundane level, Venus is still making that trine to Mars. Okay, by next week it will have gone, but pretty much, but. It's still just over 2 degrees apart, and Venus is in Scorpio. It's in a quite a high-profile sign. It's a sign, Scorpio in the Aquarian chart is a sign that is connected with ambition, and you do have ambition and you're also perhaps aware that the way you come across, the way you sort of comport yourself, if that's the right word, does matter. You need to be treated in the right way, and you need people to trust you and respect you, and the way you come across does matter. And I think that remains important. And at the same time, with that Venus trine Mars, just a little bit of effort in terms of how you come across, might be about what you wear, your overall image. A bit of effort in that department can be important. I think next week, I know the working week is nearly over. Next week, I think that Venus trine Mars is just not going to be as strong as it is now. I mean, it will be starting to fade away, but still, it might be a good idea to actually use that Venus trine Mars. Now, one thing about that Venus, it may not affect you directly, but if you are working today, or you're involved in something where a lot of people, you're having to deal with other people. It may not be work, it may be some other activity. Venus is conjunct the fixed star Unukalai, and Unukalai is the heart of the snake. And you may be aware, or you may become aware, that someone's motives are kind of up the creek. Maybe more than one person's motives are up the creek. You have to ask yourself, why are people doing what they're doing? And it seems a little bit counterproductive. This can relate to charitable activities as well. You think about charities as being nice, helpful organizations, but there's rivalry everywhere. Rivalry and jealousy is just part of the human condition. And when people get together, even if they get together to do something pleasant, I don't know, whether it's to feed the homeless or save the penguins or whatever it is, whatever they're getting together to do, there can be rivalry. As soon as you've got a couple of people, you've got different people with different agendas. And you need to become, I think, aware of those different agendas. And if you really think about it, it'll occur to you that just some people's motives are kind of a bit twisted, and they might say they're doing something to help the world, but in fact they're doing it to help themselves, or to just boost their own ego, or to defend a sort of a fragile and bruised ego. And it's got to be all about me, hasn't it? So do be aware of that if you're involved in any sort of social activities, group activities, that some people's motives they do have to be watched, because something might be a little bit twisted there. Pisces, you understand that other people matter, and you might find today you're putting a certain amount of energy into your social life, but is it really going anywhere? I think it's nice to be with people, but at a certain stage, you may just be wondering, what is the point? And so it might be a good idea not to put too much emphasis on your social life. If you have arranged to go to a party or something like that, maybe you should reconsider. I mean, it might seem like a good idea now, but actually, if you try to enjoy yourself, try to have fun in other people's company, it may not work, and you may feel that in some ways your talents are being wasted, and your time is being wasted. Having to put a lot of energy into something that is not going to work out. You probably got better things to do, and at the same time, it's the end of a week, and maybe you just need to relax. It's true that the moon is soon enough going to go into Pisces, but the moon is not going to go into Pisces anytime soon. I mean, over the weekend, the moon is moving into Aquarius. It will get to Pisces in a few days' time, but it's not there yet. And while the moon is moving through Aquarius, as the moon moves into Aquarius, it just might be a time when you want to do nothing in particular. And just before the moon moves into Aquarius, it makes a conjunction to Pluto. And so with this conjunction to Pluto, that may be the moment where you start to rethink your various social activities. For one thing, you are perhaps being quite introspective, analysing things, asking yourself, what are other people doing? And just getting this sense that your time is being wasted, and also that you don't want to reveal things. There are things actually that you want to keep to yourself. You don't want to talk about them. There are lots of things you don't want to talk about. So why should you? Why should you put yourself in a position where you're being asked questions? And at the same time, it's going to be quite difficult for you to be ignored. So you might try your hardest to be ignored, but people will notice you. And people will see you, and they'll actually find you quite attractive, and they'll, for no particular reason, they'll just gravitate towards you. Because actually today you do have a certain amount of magnetism. But it's possible that this magnetism actually irritates you. So wherever you go, you will attract people, and if you go to a party or something, you will attract people into your immediate sphere of influence. But I'm not convinced that you're going to be happy about it. So maybe if you do have a certain amount of attractiveness, which I think you do have, which I do have at you at the moment, you want to be perhaps very careful how you use it. So if you do insist on doing things today, choose your company and your locations very carefully. Go to places where you feel you're needed, where you feel that you're going to get the kind of attention you want. I mean, there is attention that can work in your favour, and so go to the right places. But if you can't really make up your mind, if you're not sure where you want to go, and if it's all a bit vague, then perhaps you should stick to your own company. I mean, you can be attractive and charismatic without necessarily having to meet people face to face. There are phones and there's social media. There are all sorts of ways of interacting with people and getting their attention. And face-to-face meetings, I don't know. I just think in many cases you're just not going to feel just particularly comfortable with it. And as the moon moves into Aquarius, as we move into the weekend, in terms of what you should be planning for your weekend, I would have said, at least in the first instance, you should be planning a quiet weekend. And if you have sort of invitations then maybe you should just turn the invitations down. I don't think it would work particularly well, certainly on Saturday. So be free, and perhaps the less people around you, the freer you're going to feel. And that's it. Those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And I now want to look at today from the perspective of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Friday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 44, coming to meet. And coming to meet gives us the idea of someone wants to get close to us. And maybe just people want to get close to us. People maybe want to tie us up in their lives. They almost resent the fact that we have our own priorities, that we are independent, and not everyone appreciates that. And I think with coming to meet, our freedom of action is perhaps under threat, and we are warned here about other people. Certain other people are not helpful, and they could restrict our freedom. And I think the I Ching is just giving us a warning here. In our social life, be extra careful, and we should not be trusting people. And I think we're going to be very aware that there are inferior elements. I use the term inferior elements because that's sort of I Ching language. People who are in some way beneath us, but who also could potentially cause us damage. And so we need to really look at our independence, and our independence really is very important. And the advice here is that whatever choices we make today, the choice that gives us most independence is the one to go for. The choice that gives us most freedom is the one to go for. So when I was talking to Pisces, and I wasn't actually thinking about the I Ching when I was talking to Pisces. When I was talking to Pisces, I was suggesting to Pisces that, invitations should perhaps be refused or rejected or turned down, and that personal freedom, having a freedom to do what one wants, what Pisces wants, is the right thing to do. But it doesn't just apply to Pisces. I think it applies to all of us. We just need to be just very, very wary, and even getting help. I mean, it's nice to ask for help. Sometimes we have to ask for help. We have no choice. But if there's any possible chance that we can do something on our own, okay, provided I'm not talking about something where we really do need help. If something is wrong in the house that needs an expert, needs an electrician, obviously we can't do it on our own unless we happen to be a qualified electrician ourselves. But if it's something sort of more sort of reasonable and is not sort of safety critical, then we should really try to do it ourselves and not get help. Because if we get help, it creates a tie of obligation. Unless, of course, we have to pay for that help, but I suppose it's still creating a sense of obligation, and that is not something we really want. It's not something we really want. It's not something we really want at the moment. And so, yes, it's true that our independence really does matter at the moment, and we should stay independent for as long as we possibly can. Now, we do have a moving line. The second line from the bottom moves, and that takes us to a new hexagram. And that hexagram it takes us to is hexagram 33, which is retreat. So it's kind of a similar message. There is no disgrace in retreating. So we've gone as far as we can. Perhaps we've gone as far as we can. Perhaps it's something we've been trying to achieve, or maybe in terms of other people, we've gone as far as we can. We've tried to be nice to them. We've tried to socialize with them. But at a certain point, we realize that's enough. But we can't go any further. So we turn back. We retreat. We retreat to safety. And that's the kind of weekend it's going to be. I think, in the end, we need to look after ourselves, and we should be as self-reliant as possible. And, if in doubt, we need to put ourselves first, and we must really do whatever we can to foster our independence. And every decision we must make the decision which gives us maximum independence, because we don't want to be obliged to anyone. And now I want to go back to the election. I know you're probably bored of it by now, but still, I do find it interesting. And so, as far as what I wanted to talk about, there is a technique in astrology which has become very popular in the last couple of decades. And I suppose it's connected with Hellenistic astrology, and you've had this boom in Hellenistic astrology, and it is this concept of annual profections, and it is this idea that you kind of move the rising sign one sign a year, and so there's always one sign that is special. And I've seen a couple of astrologers using annual profections to argue that Kamala Harris is going to win, because she's got a birthday coming up, and her birthday creates a change in terms of her annual profection, and this is seen as being good evidence that she's going to win the election. And her birthday comes just before, I think it's in a couple of weeks' time, or less than a couple of weeks. I think it's really soon, her birthday. And so it comes just before the election. And this birthday is seen to be very fortunate for her in terms of annual profections. And that's certainly something I'm going to be looking at. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to look at a few examples of annual profections in terms of people coming to power. And this is what we're talking about. Kamala Harris is attempting to come to power. Of course, Donald Trump is trying to regain power, the power he lost after the 2020 election. And so let's start off by looking at someone who definitely came to power. I know it's a chart I keep coming back to, but it's a chart I find interesting. And here's Adolf Hitler. And we know when Hitler came to power. Adolf Hitler came to power on January the 30th, 1933. And in terms of annual profections, when Hitler came to power, he was 43 years old. So he came to power on January the 30th, 1933. So his previous birthday was in 1932. So April the 20th, 1932. So on 1932 was his 43rd birthday. So the way annual profections work is they count. So he's got Libra rising. So you take, that's his first year of life is sort of covered by Libra using this annual profection approach. That means that then you go through all of the years. So Scorpio is his first year of life, Sagittarius is second year of life, third year of life gets Capricorn, fourth year of life, Aquarius, and so on, so on. Then you start again at the ascendant. So this is his 12th year of life. And it's his 24th year of life and his 36th year of life. So if this is his 36th year of life, then we count 6. So then his 42nd year of life is covered by Aries, and his 43rd year of life is covered by Taurus. So we would have to pay a lot of attention to this sign Taurus. So this sign Taurus suddenly becomes very active on April 20th, 1932. And so you can see that he's got a load of planets in Taurus. He's got the Sun, Mars, and Venus. And you can see that his Venus is really very well placed in some respects because it is in Taurus. It's in its own sign. although you could say that it is damaged by the fact that it was damaged by the fact that it's so close to this conjunction of Mars. So there's that Venus-Mars conjunction. And, Venus is also, it's square Saturn. So, Venus is perhaps under a bit of pressure, but that Saturn, he does have Saturn in the 10th house. So, the logic might be that you might say, well, this is certainly an interesting year. I mean, this is 1932 to 1933 would be perhaps a real sort of make or break year for him. And you could say, okay, Jupiter in Capricorn sort of widely trines Venus. So you could argue that his Venus is in a good position. And if you then compare his chart to the chart for actually when he took power, let's do this. So on January the 30th, 1933, at around 11 a.m., he became Chancellor of Germany. And at the time he became Chancellor of Germany, there was an exact Venus was at 1959 Capricorn, and Mars was at 1943 Virgo. So there was an exact Venus-Mars trine at the time he came to power. Now, Venus is his, Venus is, if you like, the ruler of his year, because he's profected into Taurus, and he's got a Venus-Mars conjunction. So you could say that he very much chimes to the Venus-Mars cycle. And so Venus-Mars trine at a time when he has got when Venus is his year ruler. I would have said that might be indicative of some kind of success. So that's Hitler's chart, and I think that does give some support for it does give some support to the idea of annual profections. And also another thing about annual profections, if you just look at the chart of when he came to power on its own, assuming, I think it was at around 11 o'clock, you can see that Venus was right on the midheaven. Of course, in Hellenistic astrology, they use whole sign houses, so they would regard Venus as being in the 9th house. But certainly the fact that Venus is so prominent on the midheaven, and it is the year ruler, his perfected sign is Taurus. Yeah, I think that perhaps gives some support for annual perfections. And another chart of someone coming to power is Margaret Thatcher. So Margaret Thatcher was born on October the 13th, 1925. And so she had her 50, let's get this right, she had her 53rd birthday in 1978, in October 1978. So the 53rd birthday, so that means that if we count round, that means, because she's her 48th birthday will be covered by Scorpio. Her 54th birthday will be covered by Taurus. So the sign before Taurus is Aries. So the sign that matters is Aries. That's the perfected sign, using annual perfections, it's perfected through until Aries. And of course, Mars is ruler of Aries, and that's kind of interesting because her Mars is in Libra, and it's somewhat problematic in Libra. It's in its detriment, and it's conjunct the Sun. But I suppose suddenly these three planets are making an opposition aspect to Aries. So that's it could be seen as quite a tense time for her, but it suggests that those aspects are kind of helping her, even though Sun is fallen, Mars is in its detriment. And if we look at the positions of the planets on the day she became Prime Minister, we have Venus, Mercury, and Mars. But I suppose it's nice that she was in her. Mars was ruler of the year, and so Mars was in Aries at the time of the election, and so perhaps that did help her out. In fact, there was an exact Mercury opposition Sun at the time she became prime minister. So it seemed that the oppositions, didn't really matter there. So that's Margaret Thatcher. Now I want to turn to some presidential elections and why I think George Bush matters. So George Bush, I remember 2000. I didn't make any effort to look at George Bush's chart in 2000. Not really. I didn't make any predictions about who would win. I remember my gut feelings in 2000. I just looked at George Bush because remember I hadn't been to America. I knew nothing about America, and I just looked at it from a British perspective, and I looked at George Bush, and I just thought, how can this man possibly be elected president? He just seemed completely unsuitable. I was sure he was going to lose, not because of astrology, just because of my gut feeling. As we know, George Bush did win. So George Bush, here's George Bush's horoscope, and George Bush had Leo rising, and 2000, that was 24 years ago, and he was at the time of the election. It was his 54th year that he was elected, and this is important. So that means that George Bush, if it was his 54th year, his 48th year would cover his ascendant. And so his descendant would be covered by Aquarius. And so we'd really be looking at Aquarius, and we'd be looking at Saturn. So he was in a Saturn year. And he's got Saturn in the 12th house in Cancer. And that's not great. Saturn in the 12th house in Cancer. Okay, you could say that Saturn has an affinity with the 12th house. That is one thing that can be said. So from if anyone is using Profections to justify George Bush winning, they'd say, well, Saturn joys in the 12th house, but still it is Saturn, and it is in Cancer. It is in the sign of its detriment. And as it happened, George Bush won the election. So let's look at George Bush and the election chart for 2000. So we'll put George Bush in a wheel, and we'll put the outer wheel as the election. And so that's what's happening. There's his there's sort of Uranus going through Aquarius. Remember, Aquarius covers him in this chart. And so I don't think, all things being equal, that looks particularly good. To say that George Bush is going to win that election based on annual profections, I think you would have to very much rely on saying, oh, Saturn joys in the 12th. That's what you'd have to say. But I do think it's the fact that it's in the 12th, the fact that it's in its detriment, doesn't look great. But then you notice something else. There is the fact that Jupiter is in mutual reception by exaltation with Jupiter. So This is the 1946 generation of people. Clinton, the previous president before him, was born in 1946, and George Bush was born in 1946. So Bush's Saturn is in Cancer, which is the exaltation of Jupiter. And Jupiter is in Libra, which is in the exaltation of Saturn. And so I'm thinking that perhaps the reason he won that election was not because Saturn was, assuming you use annual profections, there are of course a number of other ways in which you're going to try to predict election results. But I think that Jupiter-Saturn mutual reception by exaltation could have been very, very important in terms of understanding why he won that election. Now, I know some people are going to say he didn't win the election, he didn't win the popular vote, but sorry, in America, elections are not chosen by the popular vote, they're chosen by the Electoral College. So you haven't won an election because you won the popular vote. As people on the right always like to say, the United States is not a constitutional democracy, it's a constitutional republic. There's no reason why the United States has to be democratic. So that is an explanation for George Bush winning the election. Now, his rival, Al Gore, also had Leo rising. And he was sort of about 2 years younger than George Bush. So his perfected ascendant, the sign, the annual perfection, was actually Sagittarius. And he had Jupiter in Sagittarius in the 5th house. That's a wonderful Jupiter, isn't it? I mean, that's a great Jupiter. And you would have thought, I suspect if someone had been using annual perfections to predict who was going to win, I suspect they would have gone for Al Gore because of that Jupiter. Jupiter's really nicely placed. And, it looks good. It's in Sagittarius. You compare it with what was happening on the day of the election. Venus was in Sagittarius as well on the day of the election. Venus was making a conjunction to Jupiter. That looked good for Al Gore, but as it happened, Al Gore didn't win. So that's the 2000 election. Now let's now think about the 2024 election. Now, George Bush had Leo rising. Has Leo rising. Donald Trump also has Leo rising. George Bush was elected in 2000. Remember that annual perfections are very much focused on the 12-year cycle. It was 24 years ago. So Trump's position in terms of annual perfections is actually quite similar to Bush's position was in 2000. So if you look at here's Donald Trump. Now he has Leo rising. Now I've heard people say that, or seen people say that it's not looking good for Trump because he's just had his 78th birthday. So he's got Aquarius on the descendant. So Saturn is his year ruler, because Aquarius is his year ruler. Yet, his Saturn is in Cancer, like with George Bush Jr., because he's born on June the 14th, 1946. George Bush was born in July 1946. He's also got Saturn in Cancer. He does not have Saturn in the 12th house. He has Saturn in the 11th house. But he has Saturn conjunct Venus. I think that Venus does help Saturn. Saturn doesn't help Venus, but Venus helps Saturn. And Saturn is in it's in its detriment, but it's in mutual reception by exaltation with Jupiter. And so there is a real link up here between Trump in 2024 and George Bush in the year 2000. And that Saturn may not be the problem it seems to be. Now, there's another thing about Saturn. If you'll forgive me for pointing this out, but Saturn is conjunct Venus. Saturn, I mean, Trump is criticized for his treatment of women. There seems little doubt if you look at the stories about him that he says things and apparently does things that just are not particularly pleasant. And he's had several wives, and he's not faithful to his wives. We know about Melania and Stormy Daniels, and that's Saturn conjunct Venus. Saturn conjunct Venus can be incredibly promiscuous. I mean, it's not nice. But we're not talking about whether or not Trump is a nice person. We're talking about whether or not he's going to win the election. But it's kind of interesting that in 2016, he defeated Hillary Clinton. He defeated a female candidate. He's now up against Kamala. This is the second woman he's up against. Saturn conjunct Venus. It may be that Saturn conjunct Venus is a signature of someone who defeats women in elections. And Saturn is now his annual ruler. It's because we've perfected through to Aquarius. And so it may be that Saturn actually can actually work well because of its negative impact on Venus. So I think from an annual perfection perspective, things aren't actually as bad as they look. And let me just compare that with what's happening in the final chart, by the way, I'm going to look at is Kamala Harris. That's just coming up in a moment. So looking at Trump and the presidential election for 2024. Where's it gone? There we are. Sorry about that. Okay, so there's Trump. There's Trump's chart in the middle, and what does this say about what's going on for him? And so Mars is moving into Leo. Mars moves into Leo. I think it's November the 3rd. And I've already said that in a generic sense, I think that this Mars moving into Leo possibly works in Trump's favour, because the moment Mars moves into Leo, it's in mutual reception to the Sun, because Mars will be in Leo, the sign ruled by the Sun, and the Sun will be in Scorpio, a sign ruled by Mars, and so Mars goes into his first house. Maybe that is quite fortunate. Then you could say, well, Mars is in his first house, so it's making an opposition aspect to Aquarius, so that might undermine him. So you could say that. That's one interpretation of it, and I suppose we will have to see. But what I'm suggesting is that this annual perfection that Trump is going through is not necessarily as bad as it looks. Then there is Kamala Harris, and the argument for her winning goes like, kind of one of the arguments for Kamala Harris winning goes like this. Well, she is going to turn 60 on October the 20th. So she's going to turn 60. That means that her annual perfection, her perfected sign is Gemini. She's got Gemini rising, because at 60 you return back to the birth sign, and she's got Gemini rising. And she's got North Node in Gemini. And North Node in Gemini is a benefic. North Node in Western astrology is exalted in, I believe it's exalted in Gemini. Is exalted in Gemini in Vedic astrology as well. So that's a very nice North Node. So you could say, firstly, she's got North Node rising, and then she has got Jupiter. She's got Jupiter in Gemini. Now let's remind ourselves of the Al Gore chart. Al Gore was covered Al Gore had Sagittarius as his the perfected sign for when he stood against George Bush Jr. And transiting Jupiter was in Sagittarius in its own sign. Didn't help. He still lost the election. Okay, he won the popular vote, but so what? Kamala's going to win the popular vote. Not going to help her, is it? She needs to win the electoral college. And so Jupiter moving into Gemini, it's in its detriment. Okay, it will be in mutual reception with Mercury at the time, because Mercury would have gone into Sagittarius by then. But that's not enough to say that she's going to win it. And another thing, Mercury is ruler of her ascendant. And by perfections, we've moved back into her Gemini ascendant. So Mercury is going to become very important. And Kamala's Mercury is not in a great position. At least in my opinion, it's not. There's her Mercury. It's in the fifth house. Oh, that's nice. But Mercury is on the anticia of Saturn. And in other words, Mercury is, if you take 0 degrees Capricorn, the solstice point, and you reflect Mercury in it, it's exactly on Saturn. So her Mercury and her Saturn are reflected in the solstice point. And I don't think that is fortunate. And if you're into midpoints, she has Aries on the Mercury-Saturn midpoint. And I've talked about this before, but Aries on the Mercury-Saturn midpoint, to my mind, this shows her complete ineptitude when it comes to interviews. I mean, I know people tell there's nothing wrong with it. You look at her interviews are really bad. She's totally unspontaneous. She needs to have scripts. Even when she has interviews by people who are on her side, trying to help her, she messes it up. And I do think that is Mercury. That's Mercury on the anticia of Saturn. The fact that she's got Aries. Aries represents the world globally, how she reflects herself, and that Mercury on Mercury Saturn on Aries on the Mercury Saturn midpoint is really messing things up for her. Now, at the time of the election, Mars is at 0 degrees 40, around 0 degrees 40 Leo. And Mars is square her Mercury. There it is. Mars is just completely messing things up for her. Mars is certainly good for Donald, but don't think it helps her. So Mars is square the ruler of her perfected ascendant, or her perfected sign. I mean, I'm not very familiar with the jargon that people use who are into sort of Hellenistic astrology, but anyway, Mercury is the ruler of her year because it rules her perfected ascendant, and Mars is square it, and I don't think that square is useful. I don't think it's helpful, and yeah, she has Mars on the anticia of Saturn. So I think actually, if you look at annual perfections and you look at you compare Trump's chart with George Bush's chart, and the fact that you've got this 24-year gap between the two, I think that 24 years is just interesting because we see similar things going on with Bush and Trump, and I think that we are going to see, to an extent, history repeating itself here. And I don't think the situation for Kamala Harris is anything like as good as it seems to be on the surface when we use annual perfections. You know, I'm not an expert on annual perfections. I'm a bit of a jack of all trades with astrology. I'm sure there are people watching this who use annual perfections and other Hellenistic techniques all the time, and maybe you'll take me to task, but as a jack of all trades, it seems to me that annual perfections don't seem to suggest that Kamala Harris is going to win this election. I mean, there are other reasons why people claim that she's going to win, but as you know, my overall view is she's going to lose. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say. Thank you very much for listening. I I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. And if you are not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thanks again for watching, and I will talk to you tomorrow.